Imagine being responsible for delivering food to desperate people in Gaza.
People ask me every single day when I'm in Gaza, when will the bombs stop? When will the fighting stop? When will they stop blowing things up? When can I go home? And we don't have the answers, but we do know that that is what's needed.
My guest this week is Matthew Hollingworth, the World Food Programme's representative and country director in Ukraine. But for the past few months, he's been based in Jerusalem, leading WFP emergency operations in the West Bank and Gaza. From the United Nations, I'm Melissa Fleming. This is Awake at Night. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Where are you speaking to me from?
Today I'm in Jerusalem. I came from Gaza yesterday, having had my last full week with the team in Deir al-Balah, but now I'm back safely in Jerusalem.
I know that you've been to Gaza several times, and you just came out yesterday. What does it look like now? And maybe you can a comparison to the first time you entered Gaza.
I mean, I've spent 5 months here now, and of those 5 months, I spent 50 days inside Gaza, and through the winter and now into the summer. It's it's very hard to explain it and do justice to the awesomeness of the destruction that you see in Gaza. I mean, there's not a neighborhood in Gaza City, in particular, Jabalia as well. There's not a neighborhood that is not affected. Every tarmac road has been torn up. Every sewage pipe has been broken. Every building has been damaged or completely destroyed. It is Armageddon. It just looks completely destroyed, and there's the stench that anybody that's ever worked in a war zone will recognize in the description. It smells of rotting garbage and rubbish and sewage, and the dust and the heat doesn't make it any easier. So it really is a frighteningly inhumane place to be.
What does this translate into for people? You know, we've seen these images of just the vast destruction that you just described. What are conditions like for people?
I mean, if you look at what the people who are living in Rafah have gone through in the past, 6 weeks, they moved from a place that they believed was safe, that they moved to in November, December, and January. They were already in crowded conditions in Rafah, but they had moved there predominantly in communities. So people from Beit Hanun, people from Jabalia, people from Gaza City and the suburbs of Gaza City, people from Khan Yunis tried to stick together. But what happened in the sort of mass panicked exodus after the incursion started on the 7th of May, people got mixed up, and they're no longer with the communities that they originally moved with. And there's 1.2 million people living in a tiny, tiny area. So it's incredibly congested, densely populated, with insufficient access to latrines, insufficient access to water. Nobody receives 15 clean liters of water a day, and people get a fraction of that. People are living right up to the sea, on the seashore. So it's sticky and it's hot, and it's uncomfortable. It really is horrible. It's the worst example of an insanitary situation for children and vulnerable people, older people. people with already, existing illnesses to live through. And they are suffering every day because of it. And you add to that the trauma. I mean, most people have been displaced multiple times at this stage. People did move from the very north of the Strip, and each time they moved further south, or each time they moved closer to the coast, they believed they were going somewhere safer. And then they're moving again. And every time people move, of course, they become a little bit weaker, a little bit more vulnerable. Their resilience drops. You can't take everything with you each time. You don't always have the money to pay for the donkey cart to take all of your belongings each time. And every time you do it, you take less. You've got a lot of confused, traumatized people who everything starts again. And in the most, as I said, horrible circumstances and in an incredibly difficult environment to live healthily.
And add to the trauma, so many people have lost family members in the bombs.
37,000 people and counting have lost their lives. Treble that, having lost limbs and being physically damaged because of the conflict. But then there's that mental suffering and damage as well, which is everywhere and affects everybody.
And you've been in war zones. We'll talk about Ukraine in a minute, in South Sudan. You've been in Syria. But have you ever seen anything like what you're witnessing in Gaza?
I've certainly experienced aspects of this in different places around the world, in Homs, in different parts of Kharkivska and Ukraine. But the difference in places like Ukraine, places like Syria, even Afghanistan and the Sudan, South Sudan, people had space to move into, either within the country they were from, so they were displaced, but into space, or crossing borders to become refugees and seek shelter and safety outside. The thing that Gazans don't have, that Ukrainians had, Syrians had, Sudanese have, is the ability to genuinely cross borders and go somewhere else. It's as if Palestinians, Gazans in particular, are the only people in the world that can't be refugees, that no one's allowing to be refugees. So they are being pushed around this tiny strip of land, given orders by cell phone or by leaflet drop, evacuate by 1800 hours tonight. And they can't go anywhere that they can be certain is going to be that safe. So it's that makes it very different for me. The other side of all of that, of course, is that people get up and do amazing things every day. Our staff, other organizations, NGO staff, medical personnel, nurses, doctors, showing up to work every day, not getting paid at this point, serving fellow Gazans and showing just, immense strength and character and fortitude. It's inspiring because of that. But it's just the thing that's so different is it's this tiny, tiny area that people have been pushed into an even smaller geographic area to seek shelter and to run away from warfare.
And some would say that the difference is also that more humanitarians have died in this war than in any other. I know that your colleagues have also been under attack. Your convoys have also been under attack. What is that like for you, being in charge?
There's no question that Gaza is one of, if not the most dangerous places to serve today, anywhere in the world. We've lost more than 200 aid workers during, this crisis, this war. That threat is always there. and everybody's aware. And obviously we do everything in our power to minimize those threats and mitigate the chance of them happening again. But it is an incredibly difficult place. It's very small, and there's a war taking place. And, despite the idea that, 21st century warfare is precise and targeted, it isn't.
What does this war sound like when you drive around?
You sleeping, waking, working, it's a cacophony of noise all the time. You're always hearing blasts of some form or another. You've got staff members that are becoming so knowledgeable they can tell the difference between tank fire and mortar fire and incoming and outgoing and tunnels being blown up and if it's an AK-47 or if it's another light machine gun. The drones are constant. They call them the mosquitoes of Gaza, and a lot of small arms fire as well, because it's become a place where the value of life is a little bit less than it once was. Everybody's seen so much death that people fly off the handle at small issues, family quarrels that could once be dealt with, sitting under a tree with a cup of coffee and perhaps a few maturer members of the families to deal with it, now end up with, gunfire into the air and crossing those red lines that never would have been crossed before. Constant noise that doesn't go away, and none of it is peaceful.
And what about the sounds of what you hear when you go and speak to people, ordinary Gazans who you're serving, who you're feeding?
A lot of people we talk to are extraordinarily angry. And we, rightly or wrongly, but it's just a reality, we are the face of the international community because we're there. We're present. And, that anger, that fury, that the world hasn't stopped this from happening to them. This is a war on Gazans. And Gazans suffer every day, and they don't understand why we haven't been able to stop it. And because we're the face of the international community, we take on that ire on a frequent basis. So I meet a lot of angry people. Once we start to talk people down a little bit, listen to what they have to say, listen to their concerns, demonstrate that we are more than sympathetic, we're empathetic, we understand, we're here, we're there with them, and which is different from what they hear mostly on the news. So people do open up, and then you hear the stories of suffering that people have gone through. As you rightly said, there's not a family that hasn't lost a loved one or hasn't lost a community. Everybody's lost homes, livelihoods, possessions, all easily forgotten and possibly replaced in the future. But what I think the thing that is going to be much more complicated moving forward is that it's also a loss of normalcy. It's a loss of the social fabric that people took for granted. Gaza was actually, prior to this war, it was quite a nice place, perhaps a little bit of a gilded cage in some ways, but you could, if you earned a living, you could afford to take your children to, have a soda pop on the beach in the sunny weather, and a lot of poverty, obviously, a lot of issues being part of Palestine and having restrictions on where you could work and when you could travel, etc. But families enjoyed life. Kids would go to school, they get a pretty decent education, they could go to university, there are jobs, there's international organizations, there was a vibrant retail sector, there was a way to look forward, not perhaps as great as it should be, but nevertheless, people had dreams. Today, people's dreams are about survival. And that's always very sad to hear.
I believe also I've heard Gaza described as a source of food, not just for people in Gaza, but actually, they exported to Israel strawberries and all kinds of fruit. I mean, what is the food situation now in Gaza?
I mean, in January and February of this year, trying to move assistance around the Strip was incredibly difficult, primarily because of a lack of access, a lack of political will to give us the agreement to move into areas where there was active fighting. So in particular, Gaza City in the north. In the north in particular, in the past 6 to 8 weeks, with the opening first of Erez checkpoint and then the opening of Zikim after the incursion started in May, we've started to have consistent, regular, trucks going in with food assistance, with other forms of aid, 60, 70 trucks every single day. And you start to see that, and we started to see big changes in Gaza in the north. March I would go and you'd see people shuffling, and people were tired and they were hungry, and everybody was just trying to find something to take home for their family. Now you go to parts of Jabalia, you go to parts of Gaza City, which are relatively stable, and the place is bustling with people. And there is a little bit more hope. Food aid, at least, has gotten in. And that imminent famine that we were so frightened about in March is being slowly but surely, pushed back and rolled back. Not to say things are nice, not to say things are done, not to say it isn't extraordinarily fragile, and we couldn't go back to that if these pipelines, if these corridors, supply lines closed again. But there is a remarkable difference in the north. What they do need and what they're not getting is access to fresh food, fresh produce. The farming areas were typically around the border areas. A lot of the farming areas have been chewed up by tanks and lost. Orchards that took decades to grow, now pulled up and gone. And a lot of the farming area in the north is just not accessible. And so there's not enough things that Gazans used to take for granted: tomatoes and cucumbers and courgettes and eggplants and oranges and lemons. I mean, things that people always had in abundance because they grew there. And that doesn't exist right now. And they don't have milk products, they don't have cheese, they don't have, easy access to eggs. So people in the north are dependent on aid. But it's important to recognize that picture has changed, and the situation is not as dire as it once was. What the frightening thing is that now what we see is in the south and the middle areas of Gaza, because the Kerem Shalom Rafah crossings were closed when the incursion started, and we had an extended period where we just simply couldn't get anything through. And now, more lately, because of the law and order issues, the looting that we're facing, the violence that we're facing close to the crossings, aid has sort of slowed down to a trickle. So that has to change, and it has to change very soon.
What is a day in the life like for a WFP truck convoy or aid worker trying to get, the food that has maybe crossed over the border, but has to go further and into the communities where people are so hungry and so desperate?
Yeah, I can tell you it's a very long day. Most of our teams are all now centered out of Deir el-Balah in the middle area for safety reasons. Our facilities in Gaza City were destroyed very early on in the conflict. Our facility in Rafah is in an evacuation zone because that we had to move from when the Rafah incursion started. So we're all centered out of Deir el-Balah, which is the central city of Gaza. So they're getting up at 6 a.m. First meeting is at 7 to coordinate the day's work. And then we start attempting to move around the strip to receive goods. That all should start as early as possible every day. However, for every 12 to 14 hour day, perhaps most of the day, 10 or 11 hours is actually spent waiting. You are, moving with a convoy and then stopped, not necessarily at a checkpoint, but a waiting area until you receive a green light for a safe movement forward. So a lot of time is spent coordinating telephone, radio, sat phone, depending on what works, with the Israeli authorities to make sure that the next part of your trip is cleared. And so it's very normal for people to spend 10, 11, 12 hours in a vehicle to actually achieve an hour's work on the ground somewhere, and then turn around and go back. And it does mean going through checkpoints and front lines and spending quite some time to make sure that we can navigate those difficulties. I have around 20 national staff working every day doing just that, and another roughly 20 international staff doing that every single day. Nobody's ever having a day off. I mean, we joke in Gaza that every day is Wednesday, because you've no idea what day of the week it is, and there's no weekends.
I'm just wondering how your colleagues cope. Like, what is it like for them? Where do they live? Where do they sleep? Do they ever get a break?
I mean, it's an extraordinarily difficult place to work. The environment is harsh, and austere doesn't begin to explain it. But because people are working so many hours a day, because we're always charged and the adrenaline's always pumping, actually the morale is extraordinarily high across the team. We look after each other. We support one another. We have nationals and internationals that live and work in very close quarters. And we have the absolute pleasure of having our national staff families close by. So there's something extraordinary coming back at 10 p.m., tired and cold and, feeling a little bit down from a tough day of failing typically to get things through different areas, to be greeted by a smiling child who wants to give you a big hug and welcome you back. And the family of a staff has cooked something that they want to share and, break bread with people and decompress after a really tough day. So it's an incredibly close-knit team. One of the biggest concerns we have for staff welfare and team welfare is, of course, our Gazan colleagues don't get to leave, right? Just as I was saying earlier, that Gazans find it extraordinarily hard just to claim asylum, just to be able to leave as a refugee. You actually find that many colleagues they couldn't leave if they wanted to. They don't have the permissions to travel, and so it's incumbent on us, particularly internationals that can travel out from time to time to get some respite, to get some rest, that we recognise our national colleagues don't. And so it's really important that we help them to find ways to relax, to read, to spend time with their kids, to exercise, to have a lie-in from time to time.
And indeed, there is a UN family in Gaza. The UNRWA has been called the backbone of the humanitarian system. There's UNICEF. How do you work together with the other UN agencies, WHO?
UNRWA has been a lifesaver for all of us. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East. My very first employer in the UN more than a quarter of a century ago. So I have a soft spot for them, and they have they've always been incredibly helpful to other agencies, funds, programs. So, they are absolutely critical. I without question support the statement that they are the backbone of the UN inside Gaza today.
I was going to ask you, because I did read that it was your first job in the humanitarian system, working for UNRWA 25 years ago, I guess, and that was also in Gaza?
That was in Gaza, in the field office. The year after Peter Hansen moved the headquarters from, I think, Vienna to Gaza in those days. So it's where UNRWA's headquarters were. And I was field office staff as an intern. It's a bit longer than 25 years ago now. But, it makes me sound very old, much older than I feel. But it was, a great experience for me and set me on a path, or helped set me on a path that ultimately brought me to the World Food Programme. So very grateful for it. And I mean, tinged with a lot of sadness, because what you saw was the potential post-Oslo during a time of peace in Gaza, or what I saw in the 90s, in the late 90s, obviously appears lifetimes away today.
So what needs to happen now?
Ceasefire. We need peace. People ask me every single day when I'm in Gaza, when will the bombs stop? When will the fighting stop? When will they stop blowing things up? When can I go home? We don't have the answers, and we don't know those things, but we do know that is what's needed. The guns have to stop firing, and there has to be compromise, there has to be solutions. Hostages must be released. I mean, again, when I look at the destruction and the level of destruction everywhere, and I also think about those people being held in, basements or tunnels or buildings, it must be petrifying for them all these many months later, not to mention their families at home. So we've got to get back to a point where there's a realization that, this fighting is never going to succeed in bringing peace unless it stops now. That's the very first step. And I think nobody without compassion and empathy for all sides can, imagine that we're in this situation now because of those horrible actions, but of the 7th of October. But two wrongs don't make a right, and it needs to stop. It needs to end. Too many people are suffering and have suffered. If we're going to help build a stable, peaceful, productive society, or rebuild it, it's got to start as soon as possible.
Matthew, throughout your career, you've worked in so many difficult places: Ukraine, South Sudan, Syria, and now Gaza. I wonder how you yourself cope personally, seeing so much suffering. I'm a particularly practical person, and so I try and plan most things I do, and sort of compartmentalize my life as a UN, aid official, World Food Programme representative, and my life when I'm not the aid official. And as long as I can, meet my list every day, get enough ticks in boxes that I know we've achieved enough to get to where we need to be tomorrow morning to start over again, I know I can manage my own mental health and well-being and keep on pushing. But I also need to know that at some points I can go home. I've got 3 children, a lovely wife, a nice house, lots of olive trees, 2 dogs, 30 chickens. I need to go and see them from time to time as well to ground myself and know that life still goes on. But it is, I think like most people, a
lots of exercise, try and get as much sleep as possible, try and read something every day that has nothing to do with aid work, and escape a little bit even for 10 minutes and then inevitably fall asleep. So, I think we are blessed, those of us that work for the UN in places like Gaza, that the work we do, we see tangibly the impact it has on people's lives. It's unfortunate that many times we are working in terrible situations, that man-made disasters, wars that shouldn't happen. But we are and should feel honoured to do the work we do, and serve those we serve. So I still happily get up every day and do my job. And I've been with WFP now for almost 24 years, and have rarely, if ever, had a day that hasn't had some moment in it that gives me hope and keeps me wanting to do what I do.
Well, I mean, you were appointed WFP representative and country director in Ukraine in September 2022. What is WFP's role in Ukraine? Is there hunger in Ukraine?
Our role in Ukraine was a bit different to other operations, because you only really saw destitution, hunger, vulnerability rates that needed aid to try and resolve in areas very close to the front lines. So there was, the vast majority of our work was done, still is done within 30 kilometers of the front line in Ukraine. However, away from the relief work, there was a lot of programs that we put in place to help the government, help Ukrainians. So a lot of work with farmers, with the Ministry of Agriculture, with small-scale farmers in particular, with mine action organizations, to try and ensure that farmers didn't lose their livelihood, that they continue to farm, that Ukraine continued to produce food, both at a small micro level, but also at the macro level as well, because Ukraine is so important to the rest of the world as a food producer.
When you think of hunger and the conflicts around the world, what is keeping you awake at night these days?
Sudan keeps me awake at night. A country I served for 3 years 4 years, all counting. And, loved the place. I was there when, they changed their future. A dictator was deposed, and democracy looked like an option. And now, not too many years later, they're also facing famine, all man-made, all, that could have been avoided. And yeah, that scares me, because it's a country I know and love and have many, many, many friends who are Sudanese and are today displaced or at home trying to fix things.
You're originally from the UK, I believe.
I'm a joint or a dual British and Irish citizen.
British and Irish. And where did you grow up?
I grew up all around the world. I had a father who also inspired me into this work, because he worked for UNHCR at one stage, but prior to that he was in the military. And so I moved as a child, as lots of kids did, and I guess I got the bug of moving from place to place, because I think I've been doing it ever since I could as well. So I grew up in Dubai, I grew up in Cyprus, I grew up in Germany, sometime in the UK as well, in Scotland. So various places. So
getting into this profession seemed almost inevitable.
Yes, in some ways. Inevitable that I would do something like this, serve, in some way, but not necessarily through the aid world, through the United Nations. I think that was a little bit of luck, right place at the right time. I volunteered to work for a charity in Sarajevo after Dayton, and saw how fascinatingly interesting it could be And then thereafter tried everything in my power, including asking to be an intern at UNRWA, to have a go and see what it was like. And then once I really did catch the bug, I've been doing it ever since.
I want to ask again about your family life. I mean, have you been able to take your family with you, and how does that work?
So of my 23, 24 years with WFP, I think we have been in family duty stations for 7 of those years, which is not a great period of time. And that's tough. That's not always easy. But I'm blessed with a family that is infinitely patient and supportive. And I make sure, we get to see each other as frequently as we can. And my wife has a career of her own. My kids are getting older and getting to the point where they're going off into other aspects of life. I've got 2 kids at university, and they'll go on to do great, amazing things of their own. And I have a son who's in his teens. So I hope that soon I will be moving to my next duty station, which will be a family duty station. And we'll all be, or some of us will be together, and the ones who have grown up can visit as frequently as possible. So it's not always easy, but again, it's I think it's what we are willing to pay for the amazing work and experiences and achievements that we can sometime contribute to in the work we do.
Matthew, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Melissa. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Awake at Night. We'll be back soon with more incredible and inspiring stories from people working against huge challenges to make this world a better and safer place. To find out more about the series and the extraordinary people featured, do visit un.org/awake-at-night. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and please take the time to review us. It helps more people to find the show. Thanks to my editor, Bethany Bell, to Adam Paler, Josie LeBlond, and my colleagues at the UN, Caterina Katidi, Roberta Politi, Geneva Damianti, Tulin Batiki, Becerra Kostova, Angelica Devis, and Carlos Macias. The original music for this podcast was written and performed by Nadine Shaw and produced by Ben Hillier. Additional music was by Pascal Wise.